So we've been talking about how Babylon was the ruling empire of the world in Daniel's day, and that they had besieged Jerusalem, the capital of Israel, and taken over the nation, and then taken people into exile. So they'd taken some of the people, some of the promising young citizens in particular, to Babylon so that they could control them, so that they would feel displaced from their own comfort system and all the support that they had at home, hoping to kind of reprogram them in the way of Babylon, to make them loyal to Babylon, to make them live in the ways of Babylon, so that when they sent them home, they could be a means to control Israel without having to leave a powerful army force there, so they could continue their siege of the rest of the world. And so that's the way they did things, and that's where our story started. Well, we talked about how Daniel and his friends were taken there, dragged into exile in Babylon with that goal, and that Daniel had, with God's help, been successful in his life there. So much so that he's made a leader in Babylon. Like, the original goal was to make him a leader of podunk little Israel. That was kind of nothing in the grander scheme of the Babylonian Empire. But now in Babylon, he kind of rises to prominence, and he builds this respect for himself. And so Nebuchadnezzar respects Daniel and Meshach and Shadrach and Abednego and sees kind of good in them. And it's not easy. They face challenges, as we've seen from our stories, but they manage to rise above it and to get somewhere. But now, as we come to this chapter 3, and you think, well, I guess it's the same story. If you're not paying attention to the details, you might miss. Suddenly, they're not talking about Nebuchadnezzar anymore. Now, the Persian Empire has defeated Babylon, and Cyrus is the king of Persia, and he's put a new king in charge over Babylon. So even though when they took Israel, they left Jehoiakim in charge because he was willing to kind of bow to him, I guess Nebuchadnezzar wasn't, so he was deposed, and Cyrus puts this guy Darius, who's a Persian, in charge of Babylon. And so now the new situation is that Daniel is still in exile. He's still far away from home. He's still away from his support systems and all of that. But now he's kind of got to start over. He's got a new empire that's in charge. And they're there to push Babylon around and everybody that's loyal to Babylon. So suddenly he's got to shift gears, and he's got to figure out where he fits in this new scheme of things under Darius, and he's got to try and prove himself all over again. And I'm sure for those young men, for him and his friends and the other exiles, it felt like, well, now we start all over. Now we're in even smaller fish in an even bigger pond. And so they kind of deal with the situation, and Daniel and his friends try to figure out how they're going to negotiate this new situation. Before, Daniel had been faithful to God. And even when they were faced with threats, he and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they didn't bend, they didn't give in, they didn't cave to the pressures. They tried to be faithful to God, and God honored them in that, and he rewarded them. And they'd managed to stay safe, and they'd managed to rise in the empire and to have these positions of respect. And they were seen for their wisdom because God had looked after them. And now they're kind of set back to start over. What's going to happen next? Well, in a way, the story gets reset, but it's almost like it plays out exactly the same in many ways. And so Darius, like Nebuchadnezzar, does give Daniel a leadership role. And so whether there's a bit of time before that or not, we're told in the first couple of verses, Daniel and two other administrators are kind of put as the three top administrators over all of Babylon. And so now Daniel has this position again. But we don't know whether it's because he'd already earned respect, or whether they gave him a chance to try him out and say, well, he's already in power, he's got some kind of role here, let's try him out and see. It was very easy for the Persian Empire, if he didn't show loyalty to Persia, that to depose him and to put somebody else in his place. And so often that's kind of the path at the beginning, but somehow he gets this role, and he proves himself in the role. Before long, it seems like he does earn the respect of of Darius. And so he once again rises above. And if you're just looking at the surface, you might think, well, this is kind of the same story as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. You got this guy that's trying to do the right thing, and other people make accusations against him. Some of the evil people kind of try to take them down, and they end up threatened, and they end up, three in a fiery furnace, and then one guy in a lion's den. But other than the method of torture, that's kind of the same, right? A method of killing them. And yet they manage to survive, and God protects them, and God looks after them, and everybody ends up looking on going, oh, wow. And so on the surface of it, the story is almost identical, and you think, well, why this story? Or at least, why are you preaching the same story twice? Why not skip that one if it tells the same lesson as the other one? But there's more to this story than just that. And so once again, Daniel does prove himself. He shows his wisdom. And once again, the other administrators and high officers get jealous and start looking for a way to discredit Daniel, like the astrologers had with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And it could all be the same, except that three enemies, once again, are using Daniel's allegiance to the one true God against him. And they say, our only chance of finding grounds for accusing Daniel will be in connection with the rules of his religion. So they go, listen, the thing that we can get on Daniel is he's very religious. He follows that God of his, and that's weird. Our gods are more similar to the Babylonian gods, and the Babylonians' gods are similar to the Persian gods, and so they're all kind of polytheists, right? Like they all have multiple gods, multiple idols, and they figure if there's something that we're going to call him out on, if there's something we're going to point out, if there's a kind of a weakness here that we can exploit to get rid of Daniel, it's probably got to do with his allegiance to that one God that he says he follows. And so we know that that's what their motivation was. But Daniel shows the same kind of wisdom and leadership ability. And if you notice there, it says that because of Daniel's great ability, the king made plans to place him over the entire empire. He'd put three leaders as administrators under him, and then he decided Daniel is the top dog here. He's showing such wisdom, he's showing such ability, let's put him in charge. He's got power in that system. And so the entire empire would be subject to Daniel's leadership. He's supposed to be this guy from the tiny little nation of Israel, one of the young guys that they figure is pretty malleable, and we can work with that. We can twist him up and make him loyal to Babylon, and then he's supposed to be loyal to Persia, but he ends up here, and now all of a sudden he's risen to the point twice now where he becomes kind of a really big deal, and to have some kind of influence. He's got clout, and he's about to be left in charge of the entire empire. But you notice something about what Daniel does in this situation. Daniel doesn't exert his influence in a certain way that you might expect him to. He doesn't insist on the freedom to pray before the divination school. We aren't told he stood up and said in class, we should pray to God before we start this. He is the one true God. And he doesn't protest the other cultures or their values. He doesn't tell them you're wrong and you need to do it this way. He doesn't try to push his weight around and change the Persian or the Babylonian empires, either one of them. He doesn't try to get them to base their culture on his faith. Just like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego don't make a big scene about not participating. They just don't show up in the desert until the other guys kind of notice. They just play it low-key and go, well, we're just not going to do that because it violates what we believe about our God. You notice that the way that Daniel carries himself, he's got that same humble approach. He goes home and he goes, look, he doesn't make any speech. He doesn't counter what they're doing. He doesn't warn the king and say, look what they're trying to do. He goes home, he opens his door and he goes in, He might have started to hit his knees and went, nope, I usually open my windows. And I imagine when he put his hand on the window shutters, it was like, am I really going to do this? And he opened the windows, and he stood there and he prayed, knowing anybody walking by on the street could see him. When he hears about this political attack, when he hears about these people out to get him based on his faith, he refuses to fight back, but he also refuses to hide. He doesn't lash out and he doesn't cave in. He won't let them control him, but he won't let them provoke him. He sticks to his guns and he prays like he always prayed, and he follows his God like he always followed his God. He looks to God for help. And so he doesn't hide his faith, but he doesn't flaunt it either. He has all kinds of power, right? He's about to be given this kind of bump up the chain of command. He could have used that influence to try to make a way for himself, but he refuses to use power the way that they use power. And meanwhile, if you look at Darius, on the surface of it, Darius has all the power. Darius is in charge of Babylon, and he's been put there by the reigning power of Cyrus of Persia, and so he is in charge of this entire empire, and he is ruling things, and he gets to do what he wants, so much so that he can make a rule that every single citizen in the entire empire has to bow to him and worship him as if he was a god. He has the power to do that. And so on the surface of it, anybody of that day would go, well, who has real power here? Well, duh, it's Darius. He's in charge of everything. He can make anything happen. And you better not cross Darius, because he'll get you for it. So he's got all this power, as opposed to Daniel, this guy from a podunk little country like Israel that's nothing on the world scene. They're no major world power. And Daniel's no big deal. He's a guy who got dragged into exile. And they had claimed the victory, going, we win. We are not only more militarily strong, our gods are better than your puny little one god. Our God and our ways and our army all won, and you lost. Daniel's nothing in their eyes. But you notice while Daniel goes and kneels and prays and does exactly what he did before and doesn't let them sway him in one direction or the other, don't let them provoke him and doesn't let them control him, Darius has a completely different problem. Darius allows these other administrators to manipulate him. And because of his ego, because of his conceit, he is willing to let them talk him into making this law. And when the law comes down, when it becomes known, Daniel goes home and does what he's always done. He follows God like he's always followed him. He's faithful like he was always faithful. Opens his windows and doesn't care who's watching, just like he always opened his windows and didn't care who saw him. He shows this quiet, humble power, while Darius lets people manipulate him into doing what they want and pushing their agenda. And you know that it's not what he wanted, because unlike Nebuchadnezzar with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, he isn't mad at Daniel for not bowing. Like Nebuchadnezzar lashes out. He says, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, I'm going to give you one more chance, but I'm so mad at you right now. He had the fire stoked 7 times hotter than it normally is. He was upset at Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Darius has a completely different response. Hearing this, we're told, the king was deeply troubled, and he tried to think of a way to save Daniel. He spent the rest of the day looking for a way to get Daniel out of this predicament. He likes Daniel. He respects Daniel. And when he finds out that this was all a trick all along, he's very upset, and he's trying to find a way out from under this law. He ends up doing what he absolutely does not want to do. He's so torn up that we're told he spends an entire sleepless night. He returns to his palace, spent the night fasting, and he refused his usual entertainment. He couldn't sleep all that night. This is the most powerful man of their world. And he can't sleep. And he can't do what he wants because he's afraid of what they would say and what they would do to him. He seems to have all the power, but then he lets them push him around and manipulate him into doing something that gets him caught because he's made this law that can't be revoked. And he doesn't know what to do about it, and he's trying to figure out a way to save face and save Daniel at the same time, and he can't figure it out. Darius is manipulated by them, and he lets them have the power. He lets his ego get control of him, and he gives in to this idea that he needs to be worshipped. And so he, unlike Daniel, doesn't have real power. And so when Scripture tells us this story, they want us to notice that Daniel has this quiet, unassuming power, and that Darius is not really powerful at all. And then if you look at the administrators, they presume on the surface of it, they would claim that they were making a law so that everybody would honor Darius. Everybody would give Darius what he's due. Everybody would respect Darius. But they do it to manipulate him to do what he doesn't want to do, which is a very disrespectful thing. They're trying to control him and make it look like they're being loyal to him. Sound like the world we live in? Where people use their power to get their way? They use their power to manipulate and to get what they want. And everybody's jockeying for position and everybody's trying to lift themselves up. And Daniel goes home and says, God, I just need your help. God, I'm just turning to you the way I always turn to you. God, you're the one with real power in this situation. So I'm not pleading my case before Darius because I know that you are the God of the universe. So I'm going to go hit my knees. I'm going to talk to him. I'm going to lay myself before him. And so this law that was supposed to gain ultimate loyalty was actually really an act that wasn't. And we live in a world that postures with power and pretends things that aren't true and will try to twist everything so that they can get what they want. And it'd be easy to fall into that trap, and even as Christians, to try to get power the way the world gets power. And we would use it for good, right? We would change things for the better. It's not just who's in power. For Daniel, the way that you treat power, the way that you use your influence, couldn't be manipulative, couldn't be forced, couldn't be tricky and sneaky and deceptive. He had to live with integrity. And so he did the thing that he'd always done. He wasn't pushed and controlled by the other people around him to cave in, but he also wasn't provoked to lash out at them and try to push them around and do the things that they had done to him. And so they get through the night, and the king goes running down there, going, oh, I really hope Daniel's okay, but what hope is there? He's in there. Daniel, you all right? And Daniel says to him, Your Majesty. He still shows him the respect of the kingdom, but he knows where true power comes from, so he doesn't need to lash out at Darius for what he's done. He doesn't even need to say, look, clearly I was in the right. You go get those guys. I mean, Darius goes and gets them. They do not make it through the night. But that's not Daniel's idea. Daniel won't give in to that kind of use of power. And so he quietly and humbly and unassumedly does exactly what God has called him to always do. He's faithful. day in and day out to live for God. And so when we seek God, when we trust him, when we obey him, we don't need to control anybody else. We don't need to lash back at those who disagree with us. We don't need to attack the people who are attacking us. We do what Jesus taught us to and love our enemies and pray for those who persecute us. We refuse to use their methods to win the war for good, because you can't win good by doing evil. And so we have that quiet confidence that Daniel has if we truly trust God. And we leave everything in his hands and know he will be our protector. And he will be our strength. And that the powers of the world cannot change the fact that our God is faithful. And ultimately we are in his hands.